nishka petaban humba jashi baneshi sag kenaganungam.
On behalf of future generations, I withdraw my consent from the future that we are headed towards. A future of polluted water, a future of climate change which leaves us in the dust, a future where we do not have our friends and allies, the monarch butterfly, the clean water, the beings that live in the below earth, all of those microbes that live deep in the earth that we are poisoning with our chemicals when we frack. From the creatures in the above world to the creatures in the below world, we withdraw our consent for future generations. I am their lawyer. I am the lawyer of future generations. And I demand justice for future generations. Join me. This is the Women's Congress. It's called a Congress for a reason. It is because we are confronting the unjust laws of this country and other countries that do not stand for true justice. When a law actually conflicts with justice, you know we're in trouble. When we give rights to corporations to pollute and take parts of the commons, parts of the natural heritage, when we take the future from generations to come, this is not a just world. And so we convened the Women's Congress in Moab to begin to craft a way to bring together justice and law and policy into a body of thought. That without that imagination, without the law actually coming into harmony with justice, that we were not going to get very far. Most of you are alive and in this room because you followed some rules and some laws. You stopped at stop signs. You did some things where you were able to live because you followed some laws. The law is the rules that govern how we will live together. They are the rules that govern, they're the rules that a community has agreed to be bound by. And when we say we withdraw our consent, what we say is we have withdrawn our consent to those laws that do not allow us to live healthy and whole and just lives. When Cecilia said this morning that when we take an unfair share of the commons, we become debtors. When we think about justice in those ways, we have a new way of conforming and making rules that conform with life and with a future. And so I want to tell you how I got into this, how future generations called me. I was asked early on by my board of directors, and Sandra Steingraber sat on the board of directors of the Science and Environmental Health Network, which is the parent organization for Future First in the Women's Congress. And they said to me, you know, we need to find a different way of making environmental decisions than this risk assessment kind of thing. And I said, okay. And a graduate student sent me a dissertation on something called the precautionary principle, which says in the face of scientific uncertainty and the likelihood of harm, you take precautionary action. You try to prevent that harm. Do you wait until you've got the dead bodies piled up in the street, or do you take action to prevent the dead bodies piling up in the street? And so this idea of the precautionary principle, my indigenous friends from Minnesota, Tom Goldtooth, who's on our board now, would sidle up next to me and say, Carolyn, the precautionary principle is the seventh generation rule. And I'd say, great, now what do we do? And I couldn't make sense out of it for a long time. And then one day, a wonderful ally from, who's currently at White Earth and was at that time on a staff member for the Indigenous Environmental Network, called me up and said, we have to stop the Pebble Mine in Alaska. How do we do it? How do we put together the seventh generation rule with the precautionary principle? And I knew instantly what the answer was. It was that we could designate a legal guardian for future generations, that tribes that have sovereignty could designate a legal guardian when they were negotiating with US EPA because they have sovereignty. They could set the terms of the debate. And so we went to Harvard Law School Center for International Human Rights together, the Indigenous and Environmental Network and the Science and Environmental Health Network, and said, help us draft a constitutional provision and statutes that actually recognize the rights of future generations. And they did. But guess what? We went to the Center for International Human Rights rather than the Environmental Law Clinic. You know why? Because environmental law is only free market private property law. And so we buy and sell your baby's right to be born, polluted or not. We buy and sell the rights to pollute the Great Lakes. And we said, wait a minute. This should be rights law, not free market private property law, and here's why. Because rights law trumps free market private property law. And what happens is we decided that some things should not be bought and sold in this country. We decided people should not be bought and sold. We ended slavery. We didn't say you have the title to your own body when we ended slavery. And now you can buy and sell yourself. We said we will not buy and sell people. We will not do that. And the economy did not collapse when we ended slavery. The economy will not collapse when we declare that future generations have a right to a clean and healthy environment, when we declare that nature has rights. We will not end, life will not come to a screeching halt. In fact, it will flourish. And so out of that set of ideas that future generations should have a right to a clean and healthy environment, so should you. You should have a clean and right to a clean and healthy environment. And there are rights of community. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People specifies that there are rights that people hold together with the land. What an elegant additional gift from our Indigenous brothers and sisters to assert that the community has some rights. They have a right with the land. How different that language is from private property law. That it's not that I have a right to something, we have rights with each other. With each other. We have a right with the pelican, and the pelican has a right with us. What a different kind of law that is for me as a lawyer to think about. So if we think about that kind of thing, it led to, well, what's government for? We just finished an election where we heard one thing. Well, okay, I'm going to gloss this. Patience. Patience. We hear over and over that government has the primary responsibility for growing the economy. Isn't that it? And so what they have is the responsibility for the private property free market world. And we have forgotten what the real basis of the economy is and what the role of government is. So the basis of the economy is not the free market and private property. The basis of the economy is the common wealth and common health for present and future generations. You got to hear on the road, you breathed that air that was a gift of the plants, and you exhale that carbon dioxide, and you give your breath as a gift to the plants. That is how it should be. And government's responsibility is to take care of that relationship of air, of the gift of breath from plant to animal and back, and the gift from the oceans and the trees to the rest of the living things. The role of government is to serve as the public trustee, the guardian of the common wealth and health for present and future generations. How different our laws would be if that is the conception of government. The commons is the basis of the economy. The earth is the foundation of our life and our community. And justice is mandatory for us to survive. Injustice is almost always economic injustice. So women are not paid the same as men. We rip up the earth, and corporations get rich and make shareholders rich, and we impoverish the community. We export wheat from North Dakota, and they have to buy back the finished bread. That's colonialism. It's a part of colonialism. That is a destruction. And so at this Congress, we claim that the earth is our home, it is the source of our life, and it's the source of our communities. The commons is the basis of the economy. And justice is required for us to have any kind of future. Any kind of future.